Welcome to the last walk. 3 seconds. That's how long it took for his camera to capture the final moments of his life. But what happened afterward turned into one of the most haunting cases I've ever researched. When the rescue teams finally reached him, they found something that changed everything they thought they knew about his final hours. He was an expert who knew these mountains better than anyone, yet he became a ghost in the very place he felt most at home. On August 19th, 2017, Glacier National Park was in the middle of its busiest season. The parking lots near Logan Pass filled up early, hikers packed the Highline Trail, and the cool mountain air sat in the low 60s despite the middle of August. The skies were clear, the visibility stretched for miles, and it looked like the perfect day to be in the mountains. Among the hikers that morning was Kenji Sato, a 46-year-old architectural photographer from Kyoto. For more than 20 years, he had built a career photographing temples, museums, historic libraries, and quiet courtyards before the crowds arrived. He wasn't interested in dramatic shots or risky viewpoints. Friends said Kenji could spend half an hour moving a tripod only a few inches because he believed the strongest photographs came from patience, not spectacle. Away from work, Kenji lived just as quietly. Friends said he preferred long train rides, simple meals, and walking alone with a camera. That independence made him easygoing in everyday life, but it also meant he trusted himself to solve problems without asking for help. Looking back, it's hard not to wonder if that same habit followed him onto the mountain. A former assistant later told investigators that Kenji trusted his own judgment more than almost anyone she'd worked with. It made him calm under pressure and easy to work alongside, but it also meant he rarely looked for help when he thought he could solve a problem himself. Looking back, that habit would matter far more than anyone realized. About a year before the trip this story is about, Kenji went in for a routine eye exam. And this is the part that completely changed how I looked at this story. Nothing urgent, just a checkup he'd put off for years. The ophthalmologist found something in the early stages, a progressive retinal disease, slow-moving, not immediately dangerous, but permanent. Over time, doctors told him he would lose the fine detail in his vision, the subtle contrast and shadow his entire career, not blindness, not right away, and maybe not ever completely. Kenji didn't talk about it much, according to people close to him. Not with most friends, and not in much detail even with his wife. He processed things quietly, the way he composed a photograph, slowly and mostly alone. But somewhere in that quiet processing, he made himself a promise. Before his eyesight changed for good, he was going to see the places he'd always wanted to see, with his own eyes, while his own eyes could still tell him the truth about what was in front of them. At the top of that list was Glacier National Park in Montana. He'd seen photographs of it for years, and colleagues say he talked about the quality of light there the way other people talk about a place they've already visited, even though he never had. There was an irony in the trip, and Kenji noticed it himself. The glaciers he wanted to photograph were disappearing. Most were expected to be gone within a generation. A fellow photographer later recalled him saying it plainly. If both the glaciers and his eyesight are fading, he'd like to see them before either one is gone. You know what's heartbreaking? The people closest to Kenji actually told him not to do this alone. Friends who heard about the trip suggested he bring someone along, or at least hire a local guide. His wife raised the idea more than once before he left, saying she'd feel better if he wasn't hiking unfamiliar mountain trails by himself. Kenji listened, but he didn't change the plan. He told her what he'd always said. He worked better alone. Having someone else there meant rushing shots or feeling guilty for making someone wait while the light changed. His wife later told investigators she'd considered pushing harder but didn't. After 20 years of marriage, she knew that once Kenji had made up his mind, arguing rarely changed it. Kenji arrived in Montana 3 days before his hike, staying at the Many Glacier Hotel. Hotel staff noted his meticulous nature. He routinely left handwritten itineraries at the front desk, detailing his planned trails, photo stops, and expected return times. He also kept a copy of his itinerary and the hotel's phone number in his backpack, a habitual safety precaution he performed as naturally as locking a car door. His backpack matched that same preparation. Investigators who later examined its contents found 2 weather-sealed cameras, spare batteries, printed national park trail maps with sections highlighted in pen, a downloaded offline park map on his phone, extra layers of clothing, food, water, and a basic first aid kit. Clipped to the shoulder strap was a satellite emergency messenger, a device about the size of a phone that can send a distress signal from almost anywhere, even where there's no cell service at all. By every standard a park ranger uses to judge a hiker, Kenji checked every box. Prepared, experienced, patient. There was only one box his preparation couldn't check. Someone else there if something went wrong. The 2 days before the hike, Kenji mostly stayed close to the hotel. Staff remembered him sitting on the porch in the early morning with a cup of coffee, watching the light on the mountains across the lake, sometimes with a camera in his lap, sometimes without one at all. On the second evening, he went over his maps at a table near the lobby, checking mileage and elevation gain, marking a few spots where he thought the light might be good in the afternoon. A front desk clerk later told investigators that Kenji asked her, almost in passing, what time sunset was expected that week, whether the Logan Pass parking area usually filled up early, whether the park shuttle was running on schedule that time of year, and whether the Highline Trail tended to be busy on weekdays. She told him it usually was, but never overcrowded, and explained where the first shuttle pickups would be if parking became full. He thanked her, wrote the times down in a small notebook, and seemed satisfied with the answer. On the morning of August 19th, Kenji woke early, ate breakfast alone in the hotel dining room, and drove to the trailhead parking area a little after 7. A parking attendant who checked cars in that morning remembered him because he took several minutes at his trunk, laying out his gear on a towel before packing his bag, checking each camera body, wiping down the lenses, testing the tripod legs one at a time. The attendant said it looked less like someone packing for a hike and more like someone preparing equipment for a job, careful and unhurried. Kenji set out for the Highline Trail a little before 8, one of the most well-known routes in the park, mostly because it runs along a ridge with views stretching for miles. The weather that morning was about as good as it gets. Clear sky, comfortable temperature, visibility for miles in almost every direction. Rangers on duty that day later confirmed there were no weather advisories and no unusual trail conditions reported anywhere along the route. The trail was busy that morning. Not crowded, but busy enough that hikers passed each other every few minutes, with long stretches in between where a person could walk for 10 or 15 minutes without seeing anyone else at all. Kenji moved at his own pace, well behind most groups, stopping often, checking his map, watching the sky. Several hikers later gave statements to investigators, and many remembered Kenji because he moved differently from everyone else. One couple recalled watching him wait beside his tripod for several minutes until the light shifted across a distant glacier. A park volunteer also remembered speaking with a photographer who asked about the trail ahead. She warned him that the section near Haystack Butte narrowed and that loose shale near the edge could shift underfoot. She said he thanked her, listened carefully, and continued on. Like everyone else who saw him that day, she thought nothing of it until investigators contacted her afterward. By early afternoon, Kenji had covered a little more than half the trail, well behind schedule compared to a typical hiker, but exactly on pace with the itinerary he had left at the front desk that morning. He stopped for a short lunch around noon, sitting on a flat rock a short distance off the main path, eating a sandwich he had packed at the hotel and drinking from one of his water bottles. Another hiker passing at the time exchanged a brief greeting with him, noting nothing unusual, just a man eating lunch alone with a good view in front of him. Around 2:30 that afternoon, another hiker, also a photographer, crossed paths with Kenji near a stretch of trail called Haystack Butte. In his statement to investigators, he said the overlook there offers one of the best views on the whole trail, but the path narrows considerably at that point. The surface was mostly packed dirt, broken up in places by loose shale, thin sheets of rock that shift easily underfoot, especially near the edge. Beyond that edge, the mountainside dropped through a series of rock ledges before falling hundreds of feet into the valley. The witness said he watched Kenji switch out a lens, kneeling beside his open camera bag, while the tripod stood a few feet away, with the other body still mounted. He said it was a routine thing to see. Hikers change lenses on that overlook all the time, since it's one of the few flat spots wide enough to lay out a bag. The two men exchanged a wave. Neither said anything more. The witness continued down the trail toward the next overlook, thinking nothing of it. This is the moment that stayed with me the longest. Everything you're about to hear happened in less than a few seconds. He didn't know it then, and he told investigators later that he still thinks about it, but he had just become the last person to see Kenji Sato alive. By then, nobody on the trail realized that within the next few minutes, one ordinary movement would leave Kenji stranded only a few dozen feet below one of the busiest hiking trails in the park. What happened over the next few minutes was reconstructed afterward, mostly from footage recovered from Kenji's own camera, along with the physical evidence found at the scene. According to the investigation, the mounted camera had been running a static landscape recording for almost 40 minutes by that point, capturing the slow movement of cloud shadows across the valley below. It happened to still be running when the accident occurred, and the final minute of that recording is what tells the rest of the story. Investigators believe Kenji had placed his open camera bag on a gentle slope beside the trail while changing lenses. At some point, a small memory card case rolled away toward the edge. The footage shows Kenji turn toward the sound. He moved quickly toward the rolling case, the way almost anyone would, a fast, unthinking reach to stop a piece of equipment from going over the edge. It's a motion investigators say they've seen described in other incident reports involving hikers and dropped gear, usually with no consequence at all, since most hikers catch the item or simply let it go and step back onto solid ground. He caught the case, but the next step landed on a flat sheet of loose shale that suddenly shifted beneath his boot. With his weight already moving forward, there was nothing solid left to recover onto. The camera kept recording from its tripod a few feet away as Kenji went over the edge. The footage shows only the edge of the frame catching his fall, a blur crossing the bottom corner of the shot, before the image returns to its steady view of the valley, unchanged. The recording continued uninterrupted, showing the same mountain landscape for the rest of the file. Investigators later estimated the fall lasted between 2 and 3 seconds based on the timestamps and measured distance to the impact site. Here's the part almost nobody expects. The fall didn't actually kill him. Search teams later determined that Kenji had not fallen all the way to the valley floor. He landed on a narrow rock shelf, roughly 35 feet below the main trail, a ledge covered almost completely by dense alpine shrubs. From above, on the trail, investigators confirmed there was no way to see it. It looked from that angle like part of the slope, indistinguishable from the surrounding rock. The medical examiner's report, filed by Flathead County, found the initial impact caused a shattered left femur, a fractured pelvis, and several broken ribs, some of which punctured his left lung. Internal bleeding began almost immediately, but the report also concluded, based on physical evidence at the scene, that Kenji likely remained conscious for some period after the fall. Investigators pointed to specific evidence on the ledge to support that conclusion. Long scrape marks in the dirt and rock showed where he had tried more than once to pull himself toward a flatter section of the shelf. Blood was found several feet from where he first landed, consistent with movement after impact rather than a single point of contact. Fragments of shale were recovered from beneath his fingernails, consistent with gripping at the rock face, trying to find something to hold onto or pull himself along by. A few yards from where he lay was his backpack, separated from him during the fall and out of his reach. Still clipped to one of its shoulder straps was the satellite emergency messenger, the one piece of equipment on him that could have called for help. Investigators noted that the device would have been visible from where he was lying, based on the position of the two objects when they were found. But with a shattered pelvis and a broken femur, there was no way for him to close that distance. That evening, hotel staff noticed Kenji hadn't returned by the time listed on his itinerary. They pulled the note from the front desk and called park rangers right away, giving them the exact trail and rough timeline Kenji had written down that morning. Search crews began early the next day. Helicopters flew the length of the trail. Ground teams worked the ridgeline, checking every overlook and switchback along the route, cross-referencing witness sightings as hikers came forward. Rangers also contacted the last several hikers known to have used the trail that day, which is how investigators eventually located and interviewed the photographer who had exchanged a wave with Kenji near Haystack Butte, along with the couple, the volunteer, and the solo hiker who had spoken with him earlier in the day. Search coordinators later said the biggest challenge wasn't finding people willing to search, it was narrowing down where to look along a trail more than 7 miles long, with steep drop-offs on one side for much of its length. Search dogs were brought in on the second day, along with additional helicopter passes focused specifically on the section between Haystack Butte and the next major junction, based on the itinerary Kenji had left and the approximate time he was thought to have passed through that area. Now, imagine this for a second. People were walking only a few dozen feet above him, and none of them knew he was there. Dozens of hikers passed along the Highline Trail over the following 2 days, most of them with no idea that a man was lying injured on a hidden ledge somewhere below them. Search coordinators later explained why no one heard him. Wind moves constantly through those cliffs, and the distance between the trail and that hidden shelf was enough that a shout from below wouldn't carry, or would carry so faintly it sounded like nothing at all, easy to mistake for wind or a distant bird. The shrubs covering the ledge did the rest, hiding him from anyone looking down from above, even searchers who knew roughly where to look. It wasn't until the third day that a helicopter crew spotted something out of place, an unattended backpack lodged against pale rock well below the trail. Rope rescue technicians were lowered down the cliff face to investigate. They found Kenji a short distance from his pack. The Flathead County medical examiner ruled the death accidental. The report listed the fractured pelvis, the shattered femur, the broken ribs, and a collapsed left lung caused by rib fragments, along with significant internal bleeding in the abdomen and chest. One line in that report stands out from the rest. Examiners concluded that none of Kenji's injuries taken individually would have caused death right away. Based on the evidence at the scene, they believed he survived for several hours after the fall, likely conscious for at least part of that time, before he died from hemorrhagic shock and complications from his chest injuries. Park rangers reconstructed the accident from every angle available to them, using the recovered footage, the witness statements gathered over those 3 days, and the physical evidence at the scene. Investigators measured the distance between the point where Kenji's boot print was found in the shale and the edge of the trail, and matched it against the position of the small case still sitting on the trail in the footage, confirming exactly how far he had moved to reach it. They also reviewed maintenance and trail condition logs for that section of the highline, confirming that the loose shale near Haystack Butte had been noted in prior seasons, but had not been considered severe enough to warrant additional signage or a barrier. The weather had been fine the entire time. The trail itself was in good condition and had no unusual hazards beyond the loose shale already known to be present near that overlook, a hazard marked on some trail maps but easy to overlook in practice. There was no wildlife involved and no evidence of foul play of any kind. The recovered video made one thing clear to investigators. Kenji never left the trail on purpose, and he never did anything reckless. He didn't lean over the edge for a better shot or ignore a warning sign. He did something almost every hiker on that trail does at some point: react fast when something starts sliding away from them. It's the kind of instinct nobody thinks twice about, right up until the ground underneath it happens to give way. Several of the witnesses interviewed said as much when asked, that they'd made the exact same kind of grab for a dropped item themselves, on that same trail, without a second thought. This is probably the biggest misconception people have when they hear stories like this. The investigation reached one practical conclusion. If another person had been hiking with Kenji, rescuers likely would have known where to search within minutes instead of days. A companion could have reported the fall immediately, or activated the satellite emergency messenger that landed only a short distance away. Search and rescue personnel later said accidents like this are a reminder that surviving the fall is sometimes only the beginning. In the months that followed, portions of the recovered footage were used in the park's seasonal safety briefings, shown to volunteer search and rescue teams, and included in materials for photography workshops held on site. Rangers have said the case gets used to make a point a lot of experienced hikers don't fully appreciate until it's explained to them plainly. Not every fall in the mountains kills a person right away. Sometimes the fall is only the beginning, and sometimes the real danger isn't the height or the rock, it's having no one there afterward to call for help. Park officials also reviewed signage near Haystack Butte after the investigation closed, and in the following season added a small marker warning hikers about loose rock near the overlook, along with a reminder to stay clear of the trail edge while using camera equipment. Search and rescue coordinators said the case became part of their basic training material for new volunteers, specifically as an example of how a hidden ledge can defeat even a well-organized search for several days. Back in Kyoto, Kenji's wife later donated one of his completed landscape photographs to the small gallery that had previously displayed his work. She later said she often thought back to the conversations before the trip when she'd suggested he bring someone along. She didn't blame him for going alone, she simply wished he hadn't. Kenji packed carefully for almost every problem the mountains could have thrown at him. Extra food, warm clothing, maps, first aid supplies, even a satellite emergency messenger. The only thing he couldn't pack was another person. According to the evidence gathered during the investigation, that may have been the one thing that could have changed the outcome. That's the part that stuck with me. Kenji planned for almost everything: food, maps, warm clothes, even an emergency messenger. But the one thing that might have saved his life wasn't something you can buy or pack into a backpack. It was another person. Most of them have no idea it was taken only minutes before the man who made it disappeared beneath one of the busiest trails in America. Kenji traveled halfway around the world to see something before it faded: the glaciers, his own eyesight, both fading on their own timelines. In the end, according to the people who investigated it, it wasn't the mountain that made the accident fatal. It was facing it alone. Rangers who worked the case have said in the years since that they still think about the timeline. 3 days between the fall and the discovery, when the fall itself may have left him alive for only a handful of hours. It's a gap that has nothing to do with how prepared Kenji was, or how experienced he was, or how carefully he had planned his trip down to the notes he left at a hotel front desk each morning. It has to do with a single fact that no amount of preparation could change. He was the only person who knew exactly where he was standing when the ground gave out.